Amanda Anisimova has stood on center court at Wimbledon. Twice she has walked into a Grand Slam final with a trophy sitting right there in front of her. She looked across the net at Aryna Sabalenka in that kind of moment and she did not blink. So why did her voice change when someone brought up a 21-year-old from the Philippines she has never even shared a court with? Listen closely to what she actually said. She did not say she is a great player. She did not say I respect her game. What she said was, quote, "I know that it is probably going to be a very packed stadium." Sit with that for a second. A two-time Grand Slam finalist gets asked about her next opponent, and the very first thing that comes out of her mouth is not about tennis at all. It is about the crowd. That is not normal.
Mistake.
That is not how players ranked inside the top 10 usually talk before a match. They talk about game plans. They talk about matchups, about tendencies, about film they studied the night before. Anisimova skipped every bit of that and went straight to something that, on paper, should have nothing to do with forehands and backhands. So here is the real question hanging over all of this. What exactly is Alex Eala doing to American tennis players right now? Because Anisimova is no rookie who spooks easily. She has taken down major champions. She has walked into hostile, screaming crowds in Melbourne, London, New York, and kept her composure every time. If there is one player who should feel nothing walking into a third-round match on a hard court in Ohio, it is her. And yet, there she was, sounding like she already knew something the rest of us have not caught on to yet. This is not really a story about one tennis match. Not at its core. This is a story about what happens when a 21-year-old steps into a stadium inside a country that is not even hers and somehow, without anyone fully noticing how, turns that building into her own personal home court. By the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why one of the toughest competitors on the entire WTA Tour is bracing herself for something no coach, no drill, and no film session could ever prepare her for. But before we get to what Anisimova is really afraid of, you need to understand who Alex Eala actually is and just how fast all of this happened. Let's rewind the tape, because 3 weeks ago, most casual tennis fans in America could not have picked Alex Eala out of a lineup, let alone told you her name. Today, she is the highest-ranked Filipina in the history of the sport. She sits at world number 20, and she just walked into Cincinnati as the number 17 seed, the highest seeding of her entire career. That number is not just a nice detail. Seeding is math, not height. It means the tour itself, the organization that tracks every result on every surface, now looks at her and sees one of the most dangerous names in this draw. Here is how fast she got here. In Washington earlier this month, Eala won her very first WTA Tour singles title. And this was not some quiet, forgettable battle. She beat Leylah Fernandez. She beat Alina Svitolina. She beat Naomi Osaka. 3 names any casual American sports fan would recognize on sight. Then, in the final, she dropped the first set to Jessica Pegula, the very same player who shares a locker room with Anisimova all season long, and still clawed her way back to win it 4-6, 6-4, 6-0. Read that final score again. 6-0 in the deciding set of a title match against the top seed in the tournament. From there, she carried every ounce of that momentum straight into Toronto, where she pushed all the way to the round of 16. Then straight into Cincinnati, where she has now won 8 of her last 9 matches on North American hard courts. That is not a hot streak that will cool off next week. That is a player who has found something the rest of the tour has not figured out how to answer yet. But the stats alone do not explain what tournament directors have started saying about her behind the scenes. The tournament director in Canada, when asked point-blank about the crowds chasing Eala from match to match, reached for one word: unprecedented. He said flat out that they had never seen anything like it in Toronto before. Every single match she played, sold out. Not the usual scattering of 10 or 20 flags from different countries you might expect. Thousands of Philippine flags, all at once, filling the stand. And remember, this is happening in the United States, at American tournaments, inside stadiums that, on paper, are supposed to belong to American players. It is not only noise either. It comes with real weight on her shoulders too. Go back to the Australian Open earlier this year. Eala's match against American player Alycia Parks pulled such an overwhelming, desperate crowd that afterward, win or lose, she needed a dozen security guards just to get her off the court safely. She actually lost that day. And she still needed that level of protection just to walk through a hallway. That tells you everything about the size of the attention we are actually talking about here. So when you hear that a two-time Grand Slam finalist is thinking about crowd size before she is thinking about a single backhand, this stops sounding like paranoia. It starts sounding like preparation for something that is very, very real. And if you want to understand what is happening to women's tennis in America right now, before the rest of the country even catches on, you are already in exactly the right place.
The main stadium
because what comes next is the part almost nobody has connected yet.
Piece of change
sold out
Friday
crowds
afternoon
and a sea of Philippine flags
in
still
1
do not
hour
fully
and
explain what Anisimova
you have to
said,
pull
though.
back the
There is
curtain on how a
something
tennis
underneath
tournament
all
had
of
sold
that.
out a full
And it starts
week
with
before
three
the
matches
major
most
North
people
American tournament
missed.
redrew its
Here is
own
the
map
first
in the space
clue.
of a single
And
week.
it happened
is
only
what we
one
are
day
going
before
to
Anisimova
unpack tonight.
ever said a word about it.
The
Eala
women's
was deep
draw
into
is
her
being held at
second-round match
Sobe
Cincinnati
Stadium in
against
Toronto.
Elena Gabriela
Player
Ruse.
from the Philippines
She was not
ever
just
to
winning.
reach the top 20.
She was dismantling her opponent. 6-1 in the first set, 3-0 inches the second, and climbing. Then the sky over Ohio turned that heavy shade of gray, and tournament officials made an announcement nobody in the stands wanted to hear. Lightning was closing in. Everyone had to clear out immediately. Players off the court. Fans hustled out of their seats.
WTA singles title at the
1-2-1-1
Mubadala DC Open
with
in
no
Washington.
promise of when it would resume. An entire
Now here is where the
professional tennis
tension
tournament
of the story
stopped cold by
actually
weather,
lives,
while Eala
and it
sat just 3 games away from another win. When the courts were finally declared safe again, officials made the call. Ruse would not be coming back out. She retired, her ankle finally giving out after being taped and retaped throughout the match. Eala advanced. She did not just outplay someone that day. She survived a medical timeout, a lightning evacuation, and an entire weather system, and still walked off with the result she came for. So here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. What do you even call a player who wins, even when the sky itself seems determined to stop her? Now rewind further, back to the Washington final against Jessica Pegula. This was not some soft afternoon draw. Pegula was the top seed. Pegula had been taking down elite players all season long, and Eala dropped the very first set 4-6. If you were watching that live, you would have assumed you already knew how this story ends. A young player reaches her first tour-level final, the nerves finally catch up to her, and she comes up just short against someone more seasoned. That is how these stories almost always go. Except she did not fade. She took the second set, 6-4, and then, in the third set, something happened that simply does not happen against a player of Pegula's caliber. Eala won it 6-0, not 6-4, not a tight 7-5. 6 games to nothing in the deciding set of a championship final against the best player standing across the net from her. So here is the second question worth chewing on. How does a collapse like that even happen? Because a 6-0 final set is not just a win on a scoreboard. It is one player completely coming apart while the other one takes total control in the exact moment the pressure should have been at its heaviest for both of them. And now for the piece that really complicates everything.
Then the U.S. Open on August 30th,
of a player
where
who
for the first time in her career,
pressure,
Alex
that
Eala
would
will
explain
walk
the fear
in as a
surrounding
seeded
her.
player.
But that is not actually
Eala
the full
played her
picture.
first round match
Rewind
against
again,
the American
this time
Alycia
to the
Parks.
Australian
She
Open
won the first
against
set
American
6
player Alycia Parks. The crowd that day belonged almost entirely to Eala.
She then lost
Hundreds
the
of
next
fans had
two,
lined up outside
6-3
Melbourne Park
and
before
6-2.
sunrise.
She
just to
left
get near
Melbourne
court
down
6.
0-1 in her head-to-head with Parks, and there was no dramatic
the
press
exact
conference.
scoreline she would later
simply
inflict
went
on
back to
Pegula
work.
months down the road.
Between
It looked
January
like a
and
coronation
August,
in
her
real time.
ranking climbed
Then
from the
Parks,
low 40s
the
to
lower-ranked American standing across the net, somehow found her footing. She took the second set, 6-3.
world number 20.
She took the
She
third
reached
set,
the Bad
6-2.
Hamburg
Eala
quarterfinals
lost
on
that
grass.
match.
She
in front of a
upset
crowd that was
Schwantek at
chanting her
Wimbledon.
name from the very first point to the very last. So
So
here is the question that actually matters
She
most
won her
out of
first
everything so far.
WTA
If
title
Eala can
in
lose a
Washington.
match, even with
And
an
on Wednesday
entire
night,
stadium
on the court she
desperately
was moved
screaming
to,
for her to
she
win,
beat
then
Alycia
what
Parks
exactly is Amanda
6-1,
Anisimova bracing
4-6,
herself for?
6-2.
Because it
Notice
cannot
the
simply
small
be about her
symmetry
winning
in those
percentage.
scores. In
She
Melbourne,
loses
Parks
sometimes.
closed
The
6-3,
same as
6-2.
every single player
in Toronto,
on tour does.
Eala
And it cannot
closed
simply be about
6-1.
clutch performance under pressure either, because we just watched her both deliver a 6-0 set
The
in the most
scoreline
pressurized
itself
moment
is a piece of
her
quiet
career,
redemption.
and also lose
So back
one
to the room.
despite having an entire stadium behind
2,800
her.
seats.
Something else is happening here. Something that shows up no matter what the scoreboard
was
says.
the room the
Something
tour's model
powerful
built
enough
for
to
Alexandra
rattle a Grand
Eala
Slam
this week.
finalist in a
Center
Melbourne
court,
crowd,
10,000
powerful
strong,
enough to
is the
sell out
room she
stadiums,
walked
a
into.
tournament director
The gap
called
between those two
unprecedented,
numbers
and
is
powerful
not a
enough to make a
scheduling error.
two-time
It
major
is the
finalist
sound
mention
of
it
a
before she even mentions the sport itself. At this point, the explanation stops being about score lines entirely. Because if it is not about the score
from
line,
Toronto,
then what
from
is Amanda
Mississauga,
Anisimova
from
actually
Scarborough,
afraid of?
from
The
every
answer has
city on
almost
the map
nothing to
of
do with
Filipino
tennis technique at all. And once you see it clearly, you will not be able to unsee it in a single match. Eala plays from here on out. Go back and read that Anisimova quote one more time, slowly. She did not say, "I am worried about her forehand." She did not say her serve is a problem for me. She said, quote, "It is probably going to be a very packed stadium." Packed. That is the word she reached for. Not talented, not dangerous, packed. And the moment you really notice that word, the entire story you thought you were watching shifts shape right in front of you. Because this was never truly a story about a tennis player who simply happens to have a lot of fans. This is a story about a building, about what a crowd can actually do to the outcome of a professional match inside a sport where players are trained since childhood to shut everything else out and see nothing but the ball. Think for a second about what a road game means in any American sport. A football team flies into a stadium that hates them. Every time they touch the ball, the crowd erupts against them. Communication on the field gets harder. Confidence gets harder to hold on to. That is a real, measurable disadvantage, and coaches spend entire careers trying to prepare their players to survive it.
What she
now,
did not
flip that
fully
picture
understand
completely.
yet was
Amanda
that the woman
Anisimova
standing on the
is
other
American.
side of the net.
She is playing on American soil. This is supposed to be her environment, her language, her fans in the stands cheering her name. And yet she is bracing herself the exact same way a visiting team braces for a hostile road crowd inside her own country. Alex Eala has somehow turned an American tennis stadium into a road game for an American player. That is the twist sitting underneath everything. That is what nobody has come out and said directly, and that is exactly what Anisimova's one quiet sentence was actually revealing. Go back to what that Canadian tournament director said. He did not just say the crowds were getting bigger. He said, quote, "We have never seen anything like that in Toronto before." He was not describing the tennis on the court. He was describing an atmosphere shift that his own tournament had never experienced in its history. And listen to how a former top 11 player put it into words. Sam Querrey said something most fans would never expect to hear about a 21-year-old still building her resume. He said, quote, "Sometimes it is easier for a player to play in a crowded stadium where everyone is cheering against you." Read that carefully, because it is the exact opposite of what you would assume. He is saying that facing a crowd that hates you can actually be simpler than facing one that adores you, because at least you know precisely what you are up against. What Eala creates is something else entirely. A stadium so loyal, so loud, so completely hers, that her opponents are not just playing a match anymore. They are playing an atmosphere they have never once trained for. That is not raw talent. That is not something you can scout on game film. That is a psychological environment, and it travels with her from Melbourne to Toronto to Cincinnati, no matter what the final score ends up being. So picture Anisimova again, sitting in that press conference, being asked about a player she has never once shared a court with. There is no film session for this. There is no drill you can run in the off-season for this. You cannot practice walking into a building where the crowd sounds like it belongs to someone else entirely, in your own country, and staying perfectly calm anyway. That is what she was really admitting in that moment. Not fear of a player, fear of a room. And once you frame it that way, every single piece from earlier in this story suddenly locks into place. The lightning delay she survived. The sold-out crowds following her city to city. The dozen security guards needed after a loss in Melbourne. None of it was ever really about her tennis on its own. It was about the atmosphere she now carries with her into every arena she steps into. But a theory this big cannot rest on one quote and one analogy alone. If Alex Eala really has turned American stadiums into her own personal home turf, there needs to be more proof than a single nervous comment from one player. And there is. This is not a one-time occurrence. Look at what happened months earlier, half a world away, against a completely different American player, Alycia Parks, back at the Australian Open. You already know how that match ended.
Paulini is
Eala
30
lost.
years old, and
but pay
she
close
has
attention to what happened around that match, not just inside it. Hundreds of fans lined up outside Melbourne Park before the sun had even fully risen, all just to get near Court 6. Not Rod Laver Arena, not a marquee stadium court, a side court for a player still climbing the rankings, and it pulled a line that stretched all the way back toward the biggest arena on the grounds. That is not what happens for a typical rising player. That is what happens once a crowd has already decided in their hearts that someone belongs entirely to them. Now look again at Toronto. The tournament director did not describe some slow, gradual climb in interest over the years. He described a jump. In past years, he said, you would see tens of flags from different countries scattered here and there through the stand. This year, he said, thousands, not a growth curve. An explosion concentrated entirely around one player inside American and Canadian arenas that were never designed with her in mind. And here is the piece almost everyone misses completely. Eala is not simply absorbing all of this attention passively. She is turning it into fuel. Listen to how she described her own life-changing in real time. Quote, "My days have gotten a little more packed with the commitments and spending time with the media, but obviously in a very good way, and I am enjoying it a lot." Then she added something even more revealing. Quote, "I think it is helping me become a stronger player." Sit with that for a moment. A stronger player, not a more distracted one, not a more overwhelmed one, stronger. Most 21-year-olds would describe nonstop crowds and constant media obligations as a burden weighing them down. Eala describes it as training. That one sentence closes the loop on everything Anisimova was really admitting back in that press conference. Because if the noise, the flags, the sold-out stands actually make Eala stronger, then every opponent walking into that stadium is not simply facing her game. They are facing a sharper, more dangerous version of her. One that seems to grow the louder the room gets around her. Now tie it all the way back to where this story began. Anisimova is not the first American to feel this creeping into her preparation. Alycia Parks felt it first in Melbourne, inside a crowd overwhelmingly against her, despite technically being the home continent player in every sense but one. A Canadian tournament director felt it enough to call it unprecedented inside his own building. A former top 11 player felt it enough to publicly compare facing her crowd to something genuinely difficult to prepare for, on record, without being asked twice. And here is something almost nobody has said out loud yet. This kind of home court reversal, where a player from outside the traditional tennis powers walks into American arenas and turns them into personal strongholds, is almost unheard of for anyone from Southeast Asia in the modern era of this tour. This is not just a hot streak from a talented young player enjoying a moment in the sun. This is closer to something the sport has genuinely never dealt with before, and the tour itself has not yet figured out how to prepare its own players to face it. So when Amanda Anisimova finally steps onto that court in Cincinnati, she is not just walking out to face a rising star with a dangerous forehand. She is walking into something the entire WTA has not quite figured out how to handle yet. So here, finally, is the real answer. Amanda Anisimova is not afraid of a tennis player. She is afraid of a phenomenon. And phenomena do not politely pack up and disappear after one match. Think about everything that just happened here. A two-time Grand Slam finalist, someone who has walked out onto center court at Wimbledon and stood inside a US Open final under the brightest lights this sport has to offer, chose to talk about crowd size before she brought up a single technical detail about her opponent. That was never nerves about a forehand. That was someone quietly bracing for an environment she has never had to survive before, and doing it in her own country. And once you have seen it laid out like this, you cannot unsee it. The lightning delay that could not stop her. The 6-0 set produced under the heaviest pressure of her career. The loss in Melbourne that somehow generated more conversation than most of her wins combined. None of these moments make full sense as isolated stories on their own. They only click into place together as proof of something far bigger than any single match on any single day. Here is what comes next. The US Open is 2 weeks away. New York. The loudest, most electric stadium anywhere in American tennis. If a third-round match in Cincinnati was enough to make a Grand Slam finalist mention crowd size before mentioning tennis at all, just imagine what happens when Alex Eala walks into Arthur Ashe Stadium in front of a crowd that has been building toward this exact moment all summer long. If you thought Cincinnati was loud, wait until New York finds out exactly who Alex Eala really is. Because here is the question nobody can answer yet. How many more top 10 players are about to say some version of what Anisimova just said out loud? And when they do, Will you already understand exactly what they mean, or will you be scrambling to catch up while it happens live in front of the entire tennis world? That is exactly why this channel exists. To catch these moments before they turn into the story everyone else is suddenly scrambling to talk about. If you want to be ahead of the New York moment, instead of chasing it after the fact, this is exactly where you need to stay.